Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, I think we've had a few dictators in history. Some people who we call dictators, but maybe weren't necessarily such. But every one of them had to start somewhere, right? I mean, we often talk about the stories of people like the mustache man from Austria, or the guy with a much better mustache from Georgia. And I don't mean the state, I mean the country. But we usually think of their stories after they already come to power. We don't necessarily always look at how they came to power. Some of them we know. Mustache Man, we obviously know most of his story. But I thought it would be interesting to take a look at this story of some of the most famous dictators from history and how they came to power. Because they came to power in a variety of ways. There's a lot of ways that people come to power, right? Legitimate elections. There's being part of a one-party system where you are just selected by a small group. There's military dictatorships, and there's coup d'etat that can topple a government, and the person who is in charge of the coup takes over, things like that. So the Paint Explainer has a video about this topic, and it looks like he's looking at Mussolini, Castro, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, and, of course, Mustache Man, which I'm not saying right now because it tends to get videos demonetized. So I'll put the link down in the description. I'll also pin in the comment section a playlist of all of my reactions to videos from the Paint Explainer, so you can check them all out. Let's dive into this one.
Mussolini. After returning from World War I, Benito Mussolini believed the Italian government had failed. In 1919, he started a movement called the Fasci Italiani di Combattimento, which began with only about 200 members. Mussolini rejected democracy and said that the country should be ruled by a strong elite.
So at this point, Italy is a fairly new country, right? I mean, it hasn't been around as a unified nation for very long, and a lot like Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and others, even though you have, people all speaking Italian, and we kind of think of it as one big block. I mean, they had very different dialects and very different cultures, and these are places that had existed independent of one another for centuries and had been united here and there. So, he's like Hitler in Germany. You're coming into a country that hasn't been around that long and is still finding itself and hasn't built a strong foundation. It's a monarchy at this point. And this is the birth of fascism. I mean, Mussolini basically invented what we call fascism today.
He called for a strict, military-style society and promoted the idea of spazio vitale, meaning that Italy needed to expand into nearby lands in order to survive and
Lebensraum. You see how much of these ideas were adopted by the Germans later. We need living space.
Grow. He also supported colonizing Africa, claiming that high birth rates in places like Libya and Asia were a threat to civilization, even though, for him, Italy's overpopulation wasn't a problem.
So we have too many people. We need more territory to spread out, but we also need to stop all of those people from having too many people. So what's good for me is not good for you.
It was just a reason to take more territory.
Yeah.
Many of his followers were World War I veterans who joined violent groups called black shirts. These black shirts attacked leftists and protesters in the streets, often without being stopped by the police. In 1921, Mussolini turned his movement into a political party, the National Fascist Party, and was elected to parliament. But his most dramatic move came in October 1922, when around 30,000 black shirts marched toward Rome to demand power. The Prime Minister wanted to declare martial law, which is basically military control over the country, but King Victor Emmanuel III refused.
Yeah, so here you have a situation where, this is the playbook being created for fascism, right? I mean, this is very much what they're going to do in Germany. There's a legitimate election to parliament, but that's not enough. We want power. We're going to take it. We're going to use our brown shirts later on. Of course, we're going to talk about that. But what you don't want to have happen is that the legitimate government then turns into the very thing you're trying to prevent.
Handed power to Mussolini, thinking Mussolini could help bring stability. But the king had underestimated Mussolini. Once in power, Mussolini moved quickly. He gave legal status to his fascist militia, weakened labor unions, and passed laws that helped the rich. In 1923, he introduced the Acerbo Law, which gave a huge advantage in elections to any party that got at least 25% of the vote. Thanks to this, his alliance won the 1924 election with 64% of the vote. When socialist politician Giacomo Matteotti accused the fascists of cheating in the election, he he was kidnapped and killed. The murder caused public outrage, and the opposition parties walked out of parliament in protest. But Mussolini used this to his advantage. With no opposition present, he tightened his grip on power and turned Italy into a full-blown dictatorship. On January 3rd, 1925, Mussolini gave a speech saying he took moral responsibility for Matteotti's murder, and basically made it clear that democracy was over.
So it's interesting that he basically doesn't try to pretend that it's something it's not. He just says, yeah, this is exactly what we're doing, and we're doing it because we think it's what's best for the country, and he just owns it. So it doesn't make it okay, but it is interesting to see that he's not trying to pretend that they're a democratic government.
Local governments were removed, other political parties were banned, and the media was strictly controlled. Teachers had to swear loyalty to fascism, and even journalists needed government approval. A secret police force was also created to silence anyone who disagreed.
So why is it, you might ask the question then, why is it that they lasted so much longer than fascism in Germany did? Well, it's pretty simple, I think. It's basically because they kept to themselves for the most part. They didn't do any of the huge things that piss people off, basically, like Germany did, where they immediately start going after the Sudetenland and going after, remilitarizing the Rhineland and going after Poland and all of these things. Mussolini kind of keeps it to himself. Yeah, they go after, some little things here and there, but they're not going after major powers in Europe, which is the line that Germany ends up crossing. And I think Mussolini really didn't want to get pulled into that stuff, and he really kind of resisted it as much as he could. Could fascism have lasted had they kept it insular? I think maybe it might have.
Castro. In the late 1940s, Fidel Castro became active in student protests against U.S. influence, inequality, and corruption in Cuba. He later adopted Marxist ideas and came to believe that capitalism was the root of the country's problems. His real rise to power, however, began when Cuba's democracy suddenly ended. In 1952, while running for office with the Orthodox Party, Castro saw his campaign collapse after General Fulgencio Batista took power in a military coup. Batista canceled the elections and set up a dictatorship.
So it's interesting that Castro also starts out going after it legitimately, but then the standard is set by Batista that no, you can just take power. And so then he's going to learn from that.
Castro began preparing for a revolution, and he formed a secret group called the Movement, made up mostly of young working-class people from Havana. In July 1953, he led an attack on the Moncada barracks. The plan failed. Many rebels were killed or captured, and Castro himself was sentenced to 15 years in prison. While in jail, he renamed his group the 26th of July Movement and used his famous trial speech, "History Will Absolve Me," to share his political ideas. He was then released in 1955 under an amnesty, and he went to Mexico, where he met Che Guevara and trained a new group of fighters. In December 1956, Castro and 81 others returned to Cuba on a boat called the Grama. Most were killed, but a small group, including him, Raul Castro, and Che Guevara, escaped into the Sierra Maestra Mountains and began a guerrilla war.
It's amazing to think how easily this all could have gone away if somebody had killed him in the process of all of this, and how few people. I actually see some parallels here with somebody, believe it or not, like Robert the Bruce in Scotland, where he is declared king and then basically has his army wiped out and has to go into hiding with next to nobody on his side and kind of rebuilds a very small force and eventually comes back and takes power.
Over the next 2 years, their group grew by winning support from local people and launching small attacks. At the same time, Batista's government became more hated because of censorship, violence, and corruption. And by late 1958, Castro's forces had taken control of key areas and divided the country. As U.S. pressure increased and his army began to collapse, Batista fled on New Year's Eve.
So remember the context here. This is the early stages of the Cold War. This is when you're starting to have the Soviet Union and the Western powers, led by the United States, are using their influence and their money and their weapons to do these proxies in different places. That's why you end up with Vietnam and Afghanistan, and you have that happening here. The problem is you already have a dictatorship, and now you're replacing one unpopular dictatorship with another one that is very much pro-Soviet, right in the backyard of the United States.
In early January 1959, Castro entered Havana and was welcomed as a hero. He set up a provisional government, but quickly took full control, removed political rivals, and began turning the revolution towards socialism. By early 1959, Castro was no longer just the leader of a rebellion. He had officially become the new ruler of Cuba.
And not everybody can pull that off, right? A lot of people are good at the rebellion part. They're good at the taking power. But then once you take power and you don't have any enemies left, a lot of times people turn against each other and you're not able to turn that into a lasting government. But Castro not only lasts, he lasts well into the lifetimes of most of us.
That revolution was won on land. But back then, a lot of the biggest power struggles were happening at sea, especially with how powerful the U.S. Navy was. Of Stalin. When the Bolsheviks took power in 1917, Stalin was already close to Lenin and trusted by him. He quickly supported Lenin's moves to shut down newspapers that opposed them, create the Cheka, a secret police force, and use government violence to stop anyone who resisted.
So Joseph Stalin's real name was not Stalin. That means Joe Steele. Like it was like a legitimately made up name to sound tough. His name was Zhukashvili. He was Georgian. And yeah, while he's close to Lenin initially, and he's kind of in that inner circle and that initial group, he's not really the guy who's supposed to take over.
Early on, Stalin was put in charge of managing the empire's many ethnic groups. In that role, he oversaw Finland's independence and guided how the Soviet Union dealt with its minority regions.
Interesting.
During the Russian Civil War, Stalin was sent to different battle zones as a military leader. In the city of Tsaritsyn, which was later renamed Stalingrad, he acted harshly, ignoring orders, killing people he saw as enemies without trials, and burning villages to make people follow food policies. Some praised him for being strong, but others, including Lenin, criticized him for being too brutal.
Right, yeah, let's not think that Stalin just, embodied who Lenin was. Like, even Lenin thought, this guy's nuts, he's gone too far.
Commissar for nationalities, he also worked to bring areas like Georgia and Turkestan under Soviet control.
Right,
but of course,
Georgian.
He often clashed with local leaders. In 1922, Lenin gave Stalin what seemed like a normal job, General Secretary of the Communist Party. But Stalin used this role to quietly put his loyal supporters in key positions. Over time, this gave him a lot of hidden power. Lenin started to worry about how much power Stalin was gaining, especially after a personal argument involving Stalin insulting Lenin's wife. But Stalin was already too entrenched. In his final writings, known as his Testament, Lenin called Stalin too brutal and said he shouldn't be the leader because he was unfit for the position. He even suggested that Stalin be removed, but Stalin's allies kept the document secret. When it was finally shown to top officials, Stalin offered to step down, but no one forced him to. After Lenin died in 1924, Stalin presented himself as Lenin's most loyal follower. He organized the funeral, gave speeches about Lenin's ideas, and started building a personality cult around himself.
So it's interesting to see that, like stuff like organizing the funeral, because then when you see in 1953 when Stalin dies, you see some of the same kinds of things happening, right? He's been in charge for like 30 years at this point. And so it's been a generation and a half, since anybody has had to deal with the succession. And so all of these guys that are like part of the inner circle are positioning themselves. Guys like Beria and Khrushchev and Malenkov, and they're positioning themselves just like what happened after Lenin.
At the same time, he pushed aside rivals like Trotsky, who many thought would take over after Lenin, by teaming up with other party leaders like Kamenev and Zinoviev. But these alliances didn't last. Once Trotsky was out of the way...
No, these were alliances of convenience. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, now the enemy is gone, so I don't need you anymore.
Stalin turned against Kamenev and Zinoviev too. By the late 1920s, Stalin had eliminated most of his opponents. Trotsky was removed from power, sent into exile, and later expelled from the country. Kamenev and Zinoviev were forced to basically quit and lost their influence. Stalin's loyalists now controlled the government and the Communist Party. Cities were renamed after him, and he rewrote Lenin's ideas to support his own. Pol Pot.
Yes, all of that is a great point. The ideas, let's not kid ourselves that Lenin was some kind of pacifist, that it wasn't also capable of great brutality. But, the Soviet Union was born out of brutality. And Stalin just saw himself as the natural successor to that brutality.
Pol Pot was studying in Paris in the 1950s, and when he came back to Cambodia, the country was in turmoil. Prince Sihanouk had ended elections and shut down parliament, and the nation was caught in civil war during the larger First Indochina War.
So it's really interesting how many of these began with another person kind of cracking down on things first, and then they come into a situation where it's already been established, hey, dictatorship is the way we're doing things now.
Pol Pot collaborated with the Vietnamese-led Khmer Viet Minh rebels in the jungle, where he learned guerrilla warfare under Vietnamese control. After Cambodia gained independence in 1953, the Vietnamese agreed to leave, but Pol Pot stayed. He hoped to build a communist movement through legal politics, and he became a teacher in Phnom Penh, Cambodia's capital.
Interesting. He's a teacher. Mussolini was a teacher. Starts by trying to do things legitimately.
Secretly helping organize the underground Communist Party. But after the 1955 elections, widely seen as rigged, Prince Sihanouk's party took full control, and any hope for peaceful change disappeared. In the early 1960s, the government began cracking down harder on dissent. When his mentor was killed, Pol Pot became the leader of the underground Cambodian Communist Party, which was still influenced by the Vietnamese. He moved back to the jungle and focused on creating a Cambodian-led revolution. Inspired by Mao Zedong's ideas, he shifted his attention from city workers to rural peasants as the heart of the movement. In 1968,
I think that's another common theme we see here, is that you're going after the lower class, the downtrodden, the people that have maybe seemingly nothing to lose or have nowhere to go but up, who feel like they've been disenfranchised, who feel like they've been mistreated, not given a fair shake, and they're going to take it.
The Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot's movement, began a full guerrilla war. At first, they were small, but they grew quickly as government violence pushed more people to join. In 1970, a coup removed Sihanouk from power, and that's when Pol Pot made a sly move. He allied with the exiled king, gaining mass support from people loyal to Sihanouk rather than communism. At the same time, the US began bombing Cambodia to target North Vietnamese forces, but many Cambodian civilians were killed, and this pushed even more peasants to join the Khmer Rouge. Vietnam gave military help, but Pol Pot made it clear the Cambodians should lead their own revolution. By 1972, tensions between the Khmer Rouge and their Vietnamese allies had grown, as Pol Pot's group increasingly saw the Vietnamese as potential threats rather than comrades, accusing them of wanting to dominate Cambodia. The Khmer Rouge even labeled them a friend with a conflict, and began executing members who had spent time in North Vietnam or were seen as too sympathetic to them. Pol Pot had taken full control of the movement. He promoted strict discipline and radical, peasant-based policies in the areas under his control. As the Vietnamese pulled out, the Khmer Rouge became the strongest anti-government group. They began forcing villagers in the territories they controlled to give up their private land and join collective farms. Many peasants hated this policy, and some even killed their livestock to avoid handing it over to the state.
So it's interesting that the Khmer Rouge comes in building its strength off of people being dissatisfied with the government, and then they become the thing that everyone's dissatisfied with.
Around 60,000 people fled Khmer Rouge zones as a result. In 1975, as the US-backed regime of Lon Nol fell apart, Pol Pot's forces captured Phnom Penh, and within days, they forced over 2 million people, including hospital patients, to leave the city. They said it was to protect them from bombing, but the real goal was to destroy city life, eliminate capitalism, and take total control. Mao Zedong.
Wow.
After the alliance between the Chinese communists and nationalists broke in 1927, Mao and a military leader named Zhu De moved to the countryside. There, they began using guerrilla warfare and building support among rural peasants. At first, the communist leadership, based in the cities and advised by the Soviet Union, saw this rural strategy as only temporary. So in 1930, the party ordered Mao to capture big cities to inspire workers to rebel. Mao believed this was a mistake, so after losing many troops, he disobeyed and returned to the countryside. In 1931,
I'll be honest, I know very little about any of this, about the pre-1940s part of the story. All I know is really kind of what happened after World War II.
Communists set up their own government in southern China called the Yi-Yangshi Soviet, with Mao as its leader, and the Red Army grew quickly and defeated several nationalist attacks. But in 1934, after suffering losses to stronger nationalist forces, Mao and his troops were forced to escape. They began...
And this is such a regular part. I shouldn't say regular. Like, I don't want to imply that China was always at civil war. But China has had multiple devastating civil wars that have involved millions and millions of deaths. Some of the deadliest wars in human history have been civil wars between Chinese people. And, you know, this is just one more of those.
And a long march. a difficult, year-long retreat. During the march, however, Mao gained more respect and power, and in 1935, at a key meeting in Zunyi, he basically became the unofficial leader of the Communist Party. Soon after, in 1937, China was invaded by Japan, so nationalists and communists put aside their differences for a while and collaborated to fight against the Japanese.
There again is that enemy of my enemy is my friend thing, right? You know, we've got to focus on the outside enemy, and then we'll deal with our internal struggles.
During the war with Japan, Mao used guerrilla tactics and gained strong support from rural peasants by combining patriotic resistance with promises to give them land. At the same time, he tightened his control over the Communist Party through campaigns like the Rectification Campaign of 1942 and 1943, which removed his rivals and promoted his own ideas. In 1943, Mao officially became chairman of the party. After World War II ended, civil war broke out again between Mao's communists and the nationalists. The Soviet Union advised Mao to make peace.
Just imagine if you're someone caught in the middle of all this in China. You've been invaded by Japan. Unspeakable atrocities have happened under the occupation by Japan. And now the war's finally over. Now we're back at this fight between communism and capitalism in your country.
But he refused, and his forces, skilled in guerrilla warfare and supported by millions of rural Chinese, kept advancing. In 1949, they captured the city of Nanjing, and on October 1st, 1949, Mao stood in Beijing and declared the founding of the People's Republic of China, Adolf Hitler. After World War I, Adolf Hitler returned to Munich with no real career or education. He stayed in the army and, in 1919, was assigned to spy on a small political group called the German Workers' Party.
Yeah, so you want to talk about those what-ifs, right? I mean, this is one of those what-if times. What if he hadn't been assigned by the army to go spy on the National Socialists? What if he never, I mean, eventually he probably would have heard about them anyway, but maybe they just become one more of these fringe parties that never really goes anywhere.
But instead of just observing them, he joined. He was soon writing about removing Jewish people from Germany and quickly impressed the party leadership with his speaking skills. He connected with Dietrich Eckart, one of the founders, who helped shape his views and introduced him to influential people. Hitler also helped rebrand the party, renaming it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party, and choosing its now infamous swastika logo.
You know, another thing we talk about in history is right place, right time, right circumstances, everything coming together. I often think of Napoleon Bonaparte. If he had been a kid from Corsica that shows up to go to military school in France 20 years earlier, he probably doesn't go to France because France is, you know, Corsica is not part of France at that time. If it happens 20 years later, he misses the revolution and the opportunity doesn't present itself. You know, had this happened in a different timeline, maybe we never hear about this guy.
By 1921, Hitler was drawing large crowds with speeches attacking the Treaty of Versailles, the treaty that ended World War I and imposed harsh terms on Germany. When internal conflict broke out in the party, he took the opportunity and threatened to quit unless he was made chairman. The party gave...
There's something we also heard before with one of the other ones. I can't remember which one. I'll quit. Oh, it was Stalin. Like, I'll quit. If you want me to quit, I'll quit. And, oh, no, we won't make you quit.
Gave in, and from then on, Hitler had near complete control over the party. He also formed a paramilitary wing, the SA or stormtroopers, to protect party meetings and intimidate opponents.
And they were the ones who helped him get to power until they became a liability, and then they had to be kind of dealt with too.
Inspired by Mussolini's success in Italy, Hitler tried to stage his own coup in 1923, the Beer Hall Putsch, where he and his supporters attempted to seize power in Bavaria, but failed, and Hitler was arrested, tried for treason, and sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Yeah, 5 years for treason. He had kind of a friendly judge, and you know, this is a time in history when, you know, Germany's trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to figure out what their identity is going to be, and they could have just as easily gone down, you know, socialism, gone down a leftist path. Instead, they choose nationalism, they choose fascism.
He served just over 1 year, and while in jail, he wrote the Mein Kampf, laying out his anti-Semitic beliefs and vision for a racially pure dictatorship that would expand eastward.
I've never read all of it, but I've read parts of it, and he does a lot of kind of like... what do you call it? Stream of consciousness, where, you know, you ever, like in college, we would have this thing where they would tell us, okay, you have to start writing and don't stop for 5 minutes. You have to continually write no matter what. And then you would see what you come up with, stream of consciousness. He's dictating all of this to Rudolf Hess, who's in prison with him. And, yeah, so at times it's like he's just kind of ranting and going and going. He's not sitting down writing this with a pencil himself.
After prison, Hitler promised to seek power legally. and the Nazi Party was allowed to operate again in 1925. But he was banned from public speaking in Bavaria until 1927. Meanwhile, he focused on reorganizing the party, appointing key figures like Joseph Goebbels and the Strasser brothers to expand Nazi influence in northern Germany. The turning point came with the Great Depression. In 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed and Germany's economy collapsed.
Right, again, right place, right time, right circumstances create the possibility for an extremist group to rise. People are dissatisfied and they're just looking for anybody who says they know who to blame and they know how to fix it.
Millions were unemployed and trust in traditional parties eroded. The Nazis exploited the crisis, promising jobs, national revival, and revenge against the Versailles Treaty.
In a normal set of circumstances, people might not have turned to someone so extreme. They would have looked at them and thought they were nuts. But in this time and place.
By 1930, the Nazis were the second largest party in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament, but Hitler still couldn't run for office because he had just renounced Austrian citizenship in 1925. In 1932, however, he gained German citizenship and ran for president. He lost to Paul von Hindenburg, but this proved he had mass support. Despite repeated elections, no stable government could be formed, and under pressure, Hindenburg hesitantly appointed Hitler chancellor on the 30th of January 1933. It was supposed to be a partnership, but Hitler had other plans. When the Reichstag building burned down in February 1933, the Nazis blamed communists and pushed through the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended civil liberties and allowed arrests without trial. The Nazis then intimidated voters and opponents before the March elections, where they increased their vote share.
Another common theme we have here, right? You get just enough power to be able to ensure you stay in power by making all the changes necessary to make sure that nobody who gets dissatisfied with you can vote for someone else.
To fully consolidate power, Hitler pushed the Enabling Act through Parliament. It allowed him to rule by decree, and with most opposition silenced or arrested, the act passed. Germany was now a dictatorship.
Right. Literally, as soon as he takes power, they create Dachau, the first concentration camp outside of Munich, and they start sending their political prisoners away. And common theme across all of these is eliminating opposition.
Soon, all other parties were banned, trade unions were dissolved, and their leaders were imprisoned. The Nazis replaced them with a single state-controlled organization. In June 1934, Hitler carried out the Night of the Long Knives, purging the SA leadership and killing several political enemies. When Hindenburg died in August 1934, Hitler merged the roles of president and chancellor, becoming Führer, and the army swore loyalty to him personally.
And so this is where you're taking the head of state and head of government, chancellor's head of government, president's head of state. A lot of countries have separate roles for those. Merge them into one, like what the United States has.
From that moment on, Hitler held total control over Germany.
Okay, I learned some things I didn't know. Hopefully you did as well. I mean, obviously these are just really quick hits on these different things, so there's a lot deeper you can go on the topics. If you want to go more into some of these topics, for example, we took a look at the whole series from Oversimplified on the rise of Hitler. We've looked at other ones about some of these other folks over time, so you can check those out as well. Just kind of search for Vlogging Through History, and you'll see them up there. I'll put some things up on the screen here as well. Thanks for watching.